Hello and welcome to the Humanity and the Machine panel. My name's David Speers. I'm a journalist with the ABC. Now, before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we all meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. On behalf of WPP AUNZ, I'd like to welcome you all to today's event. This panel is very timely. Technology is increasingly touching every aspect of our lives, our economy, commerce, communications. Each new leap in tech innovation presents exciting opportunities, but also often complex ethical questions to navigate. And perhaps encouragingly, these questions are getting more focused than ever. Just last week, the role of AI featured on Four Corners. Global tech companies pulled out of facial recognition technology due to privacy and human rights concerns. The CSIRO announced new applications for AI in reducing plastic waste and illegal fishing. And of course, none of us can be immune to the important role that technology is playing right now as we experience the impact of COVID-19. So perhaps there's no better time for this panel and the discussion we want to have today about what Australians think about the complex relationship we have with tech, and that's with WPP AUNZ's launch of a new report called Humanity and the Machine. Let's introduce the panel that we have for you today. Jens Monsees is the CEO and Managing Director of WPP AUNZ. Mel Silva is the Vice President and Managing Director of Google, Australia and New Zealand. Pip Marlow is the CEO and Executive Vice President, Australia New Zealand for Salesforce. Lee Hickin is the National Technology Officer at Microsoft. Dr. Matt Beard is a Fellow at the Ethics Centre. And finally, Rose Herceg is WPP AUNZ's Chief Strategy Officer and the author of this very interesting report. And Rose, we're going to start with the report. Tell us a bit about what this is, Humanity and the Machine.
Well, David, Humanity and the Machine is the fourth chapter in our Secrets and Lies series. Now, Secrets and Lies is one of the first studies of its kind that measures the difference between the things we say out loud and the things we really think. Now, Chapter 1 was all about individual identity. Chapter 2 was about national identity. Chapter 3 focused on the over 50s, a generation we call ageless. And this chapter focuses on tech and the humanity behind the tech. Now, frankly, it could not have come at a better time. This event is being conducted live through tech. There are over 2,000 people watching this from across Australia and I believe New Zealand, mostly from their homes, and they are united by this shared moment. Now, this is tech at its greatest. Chapter 4 is an illuminating look at the tech we love and the tech we say we love to hate. But this isn't necessarily the truth. Understanding this distance, as well as the secrets and the lies behind the tech, can present fantastic opportunities for businesses, for government and for brands. This report is based on a combination of first and third-party data. Now, the first-party data includes research commissioned through YouGov with more than 5,000 Australians aged 18 and above in March of this year. This data has been weighted by age, gender and region to reflect the latest ABS population estimates. Now, the digital experience is resetting every single aspect of our lives, our economy and our community. This is happening through the lens of artificial intelligence, analytics, blockchain, machine learning, cloud computing, virtual reality, and the technologies of tomorrow that we can only imagine. Now, for all of the extraordinary benefits and breakthroughs, we're constantly seeking the humanity in our tech. How will tech help us, protect us, enable us? How will it make life more convenient and enjoyable? How will it provide new services in banking, in retail, in the fun stuff like entertainment, in healthcare and in government? How will it serve our communities and benefit our families? And finally, how should we shape the relationship between humanity and the machine? Now, David will be discussing this and a whole lot more this morning.
We will, and I want to come to some of the key findings in the report. But Jens, perhaps you could tell us a bit about why WPP wanted to do this report?
Yeah, sure. The first thing is obviously, as Rose pointed out, technology is everywhere in our society, in our economy, in our daily life. And for everybody who was on the COVID-19 lockdown situation, you could see the kids in e-learning interacting with their teachers. So it's really everywhere. And the second thing is WPP in the moment is managing the brands and the consumers, these interesting and complex interaction. And there are so many opportunities in there if you understand tech the right way, but also if you look under the hood. And if you talk about the secrets and lies, how Australians really perceive tech and what they like and what they don't like. The third thing is, I think we as leaders, we are responsible to bring the economy back now, and we have to understand how we interact with our users, our consumers, how we drive e-commerce. And if we understand that right, then I'm sure we will be back on track and we will not discuss anything about the recession. We will talk about the growth and the opportunities that are out there for Australia and for New Zealand.
Well, that would be a welcome change. Well, tell us then a bit, Rose, about the key findings in the research.
Absolutely. So we've got 5 big headlines from the research, and headline number 1, like all passionate relationships, the relationship Aussies have with tech is both complex and inconsistent. Now, let's be really clear. We Aussies, we love our tech. 82% of us say that tech has greatly benefited humankind. It allows us to buy things immediately, to shop, to multitask, to connect with our family and friends halfway around the world in a mere second. But like most relationships in the real world, we have a complex and oftentimes inconsistent relationship with tech. We want all the benefits of tech, but we don't want it to cost us anything. Now, the complex part of this relationship is focused on 2 key words: ethics and trust. The best example of this is that we want to balance privacy and convenience. We want to make sure that the tech we use protects our secrets. 80% of Australians want to see ethics factored into tech innovation. Now, what this means is that there is an incredible opportunity to do a better job of bringing together tech innovation and the ethical considerations surrounding that tech. So how do we do this and bring all of the Australians on this journey? Now, I think we need to create a new scorecard for tech that improves our lives and makes good ethical sense. Can Australia be the first in the world to do this? Why can't a supermarket provide an incredible customer journey, but also help customers minimise food wastage? It's good business as well as good ethics. Why can't a bank provide an app that allows Aussies to save for that home deposit, but keeps an eye on impulse spending so that the customer achieves their savings target? Headline number 2 is all about government. We want government in our back pockets and on our phones. E-government is a perfect example of our desire for tech to make our lives easier. Tech in government can remove much of the drudgery and red tape for citizens. 2/3 of Aussies desire a single mobile app that gives them access to multiple government agencies. Now, this provides an incredible opportunity for all levels and departments of government to digitise every single aspect of government, from tax returns to prescription medicine, to business registration, to census completion, to voting. But with the very same breath, Australians also say that they are deeply worried about data security undermining the very app they seek. A contradiction? Sure. But one easily solved by understanding what Australians really think of privacy, which brings me to headline number 3. Don't give me privacy, or give it to me, but don't make me read it. 88% of us say that we strongly value our online privacy. And yet when it comes to those privacy terms and conditions, a mere 15% of Australians claim to always or often read them when signing up for online services. More than 50% of us rarely or never read privacy terms and conditions. So where is the truth in all of this? Well, the truth is that not all privacy is considered equal by Australians, and yet many brands try to enforce a blanket rule with their privacy policy. As an example, most Australians believe health data is sacred, but benign data, like the kind of the washing detergent you use, can easily be traded for convenience. Now, this next decade will see a more considered approach to privacy. Brands and organisations will find a way to make sure that convenience doesn't come at a cost. Does your organisation have a nuanced position? If not, it might be time to get one. You might find that for benign data, your customers are very happy to share much more in exchange for better customer service or value-added bonuses. Unlocking the blanket privacy rule could in fact help you build a much deeper relationship with your customers. Now, headline number 4 is one that David's already alluded to, and that is that artificial intelligence has to be actually intelligent. We've read a lot in the news lately about facial recognition, vast databases of faces created mainly for the purposes of law enforcement. As Australians, we seek AI for good, AI for health, for the environment, for banking, for retail, for our shopping carts in supermarkets. 81% of global early adopters believe that AI tech is critically important to their business. And yet 87% of Australians want business to be very clear about how they intend to use this tech and why it's in the individual interest. This means that AI needs to make good sense. If it can help older Australians in danger at their home get urgent medical attention, great. Or stop bank fraud from happening to a customer. Or to tell you when the milk in your fridge has spoiled or when it's time to reorder your groceries. All of that is awesome. But if it's to undertake racial profiling or illegally surveil a population without their knowledge, that's a much bigger issue. Bottom line, AI can bring incredible benefit to our society. In the right hands, what is your version of the right hands? And what is your plan for AI in your organisation or government department? Across all of our businesses, as Jens has already said, we can help you navigate this delicate and artificial intelligence road. My final headline is number 5. And this is a question that we get asked all the time. Will my job be replaced by a machine? Now, the great machine takeover has been a Hollywood plotline for decades, tapping into the fears and anxieties of tech around humans becoming redundant. And while it's true that each new wave of tech has changed and reshaped jobs and skills for centuries, humans have demonstrated a resilience and adaptability to find new roles and develop new expertise in our increasingly tech-powered workplaces. Now, for example, half the jobs that exist in our own business at WPP AUNZ did not exist 10 years ago. 84% of Australians believe that tech will never replace creativity, suggesting that the ideas economy has great potential as a driver of new employment opportunities. As a society, we've only scratched the surface of tech innovation. Most Aussie businesses have or are currently undergoing their digital transformation in one form or another. Voice recognition, cognitive tech, behavioural tech, nanotechnology, these next frontiers of tech on the near horizon and at WPP AUNZ are the places where we are brimming with solutions on how to help you, your business, your government department or your organisation or brand get there. So they're my 5 headlines, David.
And Rose, there's a lot to dig into there, which I really want to do. But I want to bring in some of the other panellists here as well. And Matt, let's talk to you from the Ethics Centre perspective. I mean, why is tech such a particular focus for the Ethics Centre?
Well, in part because you can't talk about any other problem without interacting with technology in some way. Technology today is not just a kind of an object that we build and sometimes use, it mediates all of our relationships with the world around us. And so when we think about ethics as a process of thinking how we should behave, how we should act, and how we tell right from wrong, it's going to be deeply influenced by the ways that we process the world, the kind of information we receive, the pathways that we're able to communicate with other people. We found more and more that people have been asking us for feedback and input on specifically technological issues. And even when we've wanted to talk about things that aren't technology, we've found that you can't actually answer those questions without diving into some of the technology that touches on some of those problems. My colleague Simon Longstaff, who's the Executive Director of our Centre, likes to say that technical mastery without ethical restraint sits at the root of tyranny. When you're incredibly good at doing what you can do, but you don't know when you should and when you shouldn't do that, that's a real pathway to the kind of totalitarianism that all Australians genuinely fear. And
Matt, I mean, you put your finger on it there, and Lee, well, let's bring in some of our tech leaders here. Lee, this very point about the balance between the potential benefits of new technology and the ethical risks. You write in the report, just because we can doesn't mean we should. What do you mean by that?
Well, thanks, David. Yeah, it's a good question. And I have to thank the scriptwriters of Jurassic Park for this very simple yet profound statement, which is really about injecting the humanity and maintaining that humanity into these decisions that are obviously now becoming, as Matt mentions, becoming an integral part of our daily lives. And the important thing here is it's less about ethics even, I think. It's more about that responsibility, about having a moment where a human being is asking the questions about what is the impact? If we do this, what does it really mean? And have we really weighed up all of the sort of the pros and cons? And it's fundamentally about that. It's about making sure that this isn't about technology and humanity separately. It's about tech and humanity working in collaboration, because fundamentally AI is a fantastic and amazing tool with huge potential benefits, but it's never going to ask that question, should we do this? It's always going to address the problem on the data. And that's where you kind of need to always have that point of questioning in there. Is this the right thing to do?
So it's really about building ethics into the design of new technology. Now, clearly not everyone does this, but Salesforce has an Office of Ethical and Human Use. Why is that necessary?
Well, it's necessary because ethics and inclusion have not always been at the heart of product design. It's not a new problem. If you go back in time and you think about the launch of the airbag, when that was launched, it disproportionately hurt women and children. Why? All-male design team, and they used a crash test dummy in a man's body. If you go fast forward to a digital solution, similar problem, a very large company was using AI to filter CVs, and the way that it was built filtered out the CVs of females more than men, based on the language differences that men and women were using. So we know that we have to take intentional steps to overcome the unintentional impact. And that's why we created this office. It was for our customers, it was for our own use. We look at policy, we look at law, product design and ethics, and put together some frameworks and tools that we hold ourselves accountable and we share with our customers and partners.
And Mel, what about Google? You talk about tech for good. What does that mean for your company?
Well, look, I mean, I think tech for good is a very broad term. So good can mean something really trivial, like answering a question really quickly in the context of search or helping you find a photo. It can also mean, we've got technology that can help doctors detect lung cancer. And so that spectrum is really broad. And I think, as all of the panellists have mentioned, having a principled approach when you're creating this stuff, particularly when the technology is almost boundless, is critical. We created some AI principles about 2.5 years ago now, 7 of them. The first one is that it has to create a social benefit. And to Lee's point, where are the boundaries? Where are the things we don't want to do? And making sure that we stand behind those as an organisation.
Well, Rose, just coming back to what the research has shown here, clearly there is an overwhelming view that tech does benefit humankind, right? I think 82% agree with that proposition. However, there is the trust concern, 80% saying they want more ethical oversight. So why is that happening? How do you explain that trust deficit, I suppose?
Well, look, we're human. We trust our friends, we trust our family. If you ask a person for a recommendation, you're much likely to listen to somebody that you trust before looking at the research you find yourself online. We need to remember that the humanity in us is always fighting to keep us just and true and honest. And so in every tech development, we need to make sure that we don't separate the best of us, which is the trusting, ethical side of all people and hopefully all machinery and technology moving forward.
Can I come back to something you mentioned in the opening remarks about a scorecard for tech? Can you just tease out what you're talking about there? Does that deal with this issue of building trust?
Absolutely. I think, again, if I use the analogy of a supermarket, we could use all of the tech to help people shop better, but we could also get them to stop wasting food. What a wonderful way of incorporating the ethical consideration of food wastage in countries that don't have enough to feed themselves, and a Woolworths or a Coles or an Aldi.
So how would this work, this scorecard?
There'd be quite literally a scorecard which would give every organisation a score out of 10 or another number to say, here are the things that you need to consider. Is it good for society? Is it good for the community? Is it good for the environment? Is it good for social justice? Does it help somebody get into a job that ordinarily wouldn't have a chance? It's whatever we want to make it, but it takes into consideration all the other factors that currently isn't being taken into consideration.
Jens, you talk to senior leaders in Australian business every day. What are the biggest challenges they're grappling with when it comes to these issues about balancing ethical or humanity issues with new technology?
Well, first it's the speed and the dynamics. So the lawmakers are normally 5 to 7 years behind the leading tech. So what do I do in this space? There are no rules. There's everything new. And then we need to have moral and ethics coming in because there's nothing written in a kind of legal document.
Is it a bad thing to have law dragging so far behind? Or is that it's a reality?
It's no other way. Because I think before you understand what AI can do and put it into a legal context, you need to think about it and you need to understand it. And that's maybe the second thing where leaders are struggling is really, do I understand it? Do I understand all the possibilities here? And do I put in my design the right principles? And that's not only short-term money making. It's like how convenient, how happy are my users, my consumers, my shoppers? that is, I think, the driving question. So everything has to start from the customer, and then you can lay it out. And the last thing, maybe we don't know how the future will be in 10 years or in 20. And 80% of CEOs in Australia are struggling to say, well, my business model is sustainable for the next 10 years, 80%. So we need to help them navigate this new norm, how to adapt quickly the business model, but also then again the customer interaction. Because the customer is very demanding. I want it all, I want it now. So please, brand, users, products, adapt quickly. And there is no silver bullet in our world.
I mean, it raises the question, does this inevitably slow things down? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And Matt, I mean, the days of move fast and break things, if they are indeed over, what do you think? Does this mean that businesses do need to slow down with tech development to make sure the ethical boxes are ticked?
Yes and no. This is something that we get asked a lot, is ethics the rival of innovation? And the answer is no. Ethics is just good innovation. It's innovation done well. Because when you think about what innovation is, what design is, it's about building things that are great and that solve people's genuine problems. If you move too quickly because you don't properly understand the problem, or you've assumed that what's a problem for someone represents what's a problem for everyone, and you move too quickly to the solution and to the build because you want to be first to market, because you've got a regular kind of cadence where you want to produce products, there is a chance that you're missing something. I think that, you know, ethics is often talked about in the context of large organisations, not just tech, but across the board, as being something that comes in when there's been some kind of fire that needs to be put out. But actually, a more robust approach to ethics is to say that ethics is about making that flame shine brighter. It's actually about bringing that creative genius that people have with a deep understanding of all of the people that it might affect and what it actually means for a society to embrace a particular product, to take that on. What happens in terms of the goals? Are they justified? Are the methods by which we're bringing that about justified? And most significantly today, when we're dealing with the speed and scale that we are, what are the side effects? What are the unforeseen consequences? And are they genuinely unforeseen, or did you just not look for them? One of the things that we're seeing when we see the information about, you know, over 80% of Australians thinking technology is good for humanity, the first question I want to ask is which humans? Because so much of the building that we've done has had, yes, a net benefit, but those benefits have flowed disproportionately to certain groups, and the harms have also flowed disproportionately to certain groups. That's what innovation does. It tries to properly unlock all of the different aspects of what's going to happen and try to address not just to maximise the benefits, but to minimise those harms.
And I want to come to that because that also feeds into discussion around the future of work in particular. But just on this question of how to deal with ethical questions and whether, I guess, to be scared of them and the potential spot fires that could emerge down the track. I mean, Pip, you've written that fear kills creativity, so we can't really be afraid of these questions. I guess it comes to what Matt's saying there, Pip, doesn't it? That you need to embrace those questions.
Yeah, look, I thought Matt made some fantastic points. And I think about fear killing creativity, which is, your brain does shut down a little bit with fear. But what's the fear coming from? And it's often the fear of failure and the implications and the consequence of that failure. So for startups and innovators, they just know that failure is on the road to solving a problem for humans, for people, the things we want to do. And generally they have a greater appetite for that. But also if you're a startup, you don't generally have many customers yet. So part of the challenges in big organisations, how do you still drive that innovation and allow for that failure to be part of it without, impacting your reputation, you're impacting your customers, your staff. And look, I lived through a couple of things. I worked with Lee at Microsoft when Microsoft launched Tay, the bot, for those of you who remember, and she got taught some bad things by bad actors. And the way that Satya led through that was fantastic. He said, what happened was wrong, it was not our intention, and we are going to learn and keep innovating. You're seeing companies now learn by listening to employees. Rose talked earlier about a number of large organisations saying they are not going to be using facial recognition until certain things get sorted out with the law, and that is people learning now by listening. And so I think that's the thing for all of us to be thinking about, is how are we making sure that as large large businesses, we're thinking ahead of the law, thinking ahead of regulation, asking ourselves the question that you've heard from the other panellists, should we be doing this right now? Is this the right thing to do? And let's be clear, maybe what was right 10, 20, 30 years ago is not right today. So you have to keep asking that question.
Yeah, and Jens, for those who are watching and wondering where do they turn to get that help, to get that input, to make sure that they're getting it right in that balance, where do they go?
Well, I suggest they should invite Rose and other people on the panel here and have an honest discussion. So from my point of view, especially these both distinctions, that is tech skills and that is creativity. I think that's a very yesterday thought. It's like, we do brick and mortar commerce and we do e-commerce. Maybe that's how it started, but now we bring the both worlds together. So I think a programmer is as creative as maybe one of our creative leaders in one of our agencies. So I don't want to make a distinction here. I think we have to define creativity in a new and broader scope, and then taking the morals and the ethics that we talked about it into the design. Because it's not, hey, I'm creative or I'm tech. That is really not the thought anymore.
Mel, in the research in the Humanity and the Machine report, it does reveal that Australians feel tech companies should have to prove that new innovations will benefit society, not just improve their profits. Is that a reasonable expectation, do you think?
Well, I think it's definitely a reasonable North Star. I think what we all want from our tech companies is that they're using this tech for good. And again, I referenced some of the principles that we've come out with and that Matt and Pip have both spoken to. I think the risk is that when you look at just the tech in and of itself, the spectrum of things that you can think about that it's capable of is very, very broad. When you start to think about, as Matt mentioned, the problems that you can solve with this sort of technology, then I think we're able to make sort of much more detailed decisions. Look, I also would say I think there is a profit motive is also very good at driving innovation. But should there be accountability? Yes. Should there be scrutiny? Yes. I think with my Google hat on, we have to build for billions of users all over the world. And again, Matt made a really good point. What we've built for the first billion users of the internet is actually really different to what you need to help enable the next billion users on the internet. And so, we've had to learn and grow at Google about how to adapt our products and services in that way. And, the technology gets applied in different ways for different sorts of users all over the world. So inclusive, responsible, and should there be guidelines? Absolutely, yes.
Let's shift to this discussion around the future of work. And Rose, you said this is something you get asked more often than not. When is a machine, a robot, going to take my job? I'll ask you later for me personally. Tell us a bit more about the fears that are there and how grounded they are in reality.
They're so grounded in some crazy fear, because the truth is that this narrative has been going on for decades and decades. A machine will take my job. The truth is, imagination, ingenuity, invention is incredibly human, and there will always be room for creativity in our society. My best answer is this one. People laud the success of Netflix, and it's a terrific service. It's an incredible platform. But it's the content we watch on Netflix. It's the writers, the creators, the designers, the screenwriters who are the ones that are fueling that economy.
They're the jobs.
Absolutely right. Their writing is imagination. Out of nothing, they've come up with a narrative. I'm watching Ozark at the moment, series 3, can't get enough. That writing is why I'm there on Netflix, not for just the tech of the platform. Nothing will drown out imagination and creativity. Jobs can be protected in the same way that things are destroyed. New industries are created. Half our workforce at WPP AUNZ is working in a job that didn't exist even 5 years ago. So I have great faith that people's jobs will be protected, new ones will be created as well.
Yeah, and this is the thing, new ones are created, but yes, whenever there's a change, there are some losers here. Matt, from the ethics perspective here, I mean, should companies balance the opportunities for efficiency against protecting existing jobs?
I think this is one of the biggest questions that we're asking, not just in technology, but also as we're talking about energy transitions and just transitions. You're right, the technology does create new jobs, but when we were talking before this panel started, we talked about, technology is not going to create a new job for the 55 to 60-year-old truck driver whose vehicle is now automated and doesn't have the resources or the time to be able to reskill and suddenly be able to work at some tech startup or some new organisation that started. There will be some people who are harmed by the transition. And that's not a conversation that I can give a quick one-line answer to, but I think the other point that's really important is that so often these kinds of transformations, what we do is we see a technological transformation and we want to find a technological solution for that, or we want to find a fast solution for that. Tech companies are bringing the disruption, and they should be thinking and being kind of canaries in the coal mine to when that disruption is going to have really negative impacts on certain groups in society. But it's a political question to resolve, and we need to bring lawmakers, we need to bring policymakers on board for that conversation, because it does bring us into conversations around universal basic income. It brings questions that an organisation alone isn't equipped to solve, and arguably it's not appropriate for them to provide a solution to that, because it's a much larger social question that needs to be addressed. But definitely when that disruption is coming, being on the forefront of that and thinking about the people who will be disrupted and what steps an organisation can take to be part of that solution, or alerting the people who can solve that problem that it's there, I think that's a basic level of responsibility that we need to start thinking about as we see more and more disruption coming forward. And then we need to kind of drag policymakers and lawmakers to the party on this as well.
Well, there's no doubt that there's a lot of politics in these decisions. No government wants to see jobs lost in a part of the country they're trying to win over. But that raises the question, Jens. I mean, how much of a role should government play? How much of a role should industry play? What are the jobs of the future as you see it? And whose role is it to try and steer the economy in the right direction?
I think it's an effort that comes from all sides, from the science, from the government, from the rule makers, but also from the industry. Let's start with the industry. We are now talking about disruption. So one company is disrupting the other company. If we are good leaders, we are in constant change within our company, and we are driving that transformation within the company. And if you think about what Microsoft was 30 years ago, or what Nokia was once, it's going very fast. And Nokia didn't change. Microsoft adapted and changed to the new laws and the new technologies and new demands. So I think on the leader side, we need to be curious, open, we need to learn, we need to skill up all the time, and we need to keep track. And then we are not running the risk of being disrupted. As users or as staff or as workers, we need to also, focus on constant learning. 30 years ago, my father is asking me, what do you want to do and what is your job? And you cannot answer that question anymore, because you learn something and then you adapt and you learn something else. So, like 5 years ago, I was working on the autonomous driving car in BMW. Very interesting, very creative and very rule-breaking program. And now we see them, in some of the major cities already on the street. And this change, from an industry perspective, from a leadership perspective, we need to be very careful and very adaptive managing. Otherwise, we are running the risk of being disrupted, and then we have a problem.
Coming back to this question about the role of government versus the role of industry, I mean, Pip, to you on this, we've just had a very recent example. The other day, the government announced that it is going to change the way university funding works, make it a lot cheaper to study things like teaching and nursing, maths and science and so on, but far more expensive to study humanities. I don't know if you want to comment on that specifically, but the role of government in trying to steer students and our universities to what it believes the economy needs. What do you think about that approach?
Well, I don't think it's a single person or division's responsibility to decide, which courses or what skills, because to the point you've heard before, the jobs of the future don't exist today. In fact, Mel and I were talking about it earlier. We work for companies that didn't exist, when we went to school. We couldn't have defined this career path. And so I think what we need to be doing is embracing a whole lifelong learning sort of model that actually it's cradle to grave. because we constantly need to be assessing the changes in the world around us and how we participate in that. And we will see jobs change based on that. You've seen it go from horse and carriage to car, and then Jen's talked about autonomous vehicles. The skills you need to participate in those different eras have evolved. You still need the job to be done, which is getting from A to B, hasn't changed, but the method and the skills I need to do that evolve. So I've got to take a role as an individual and asking myself about that. Government's got to take a role also in creating a system and a fabric for that to occur. And industry has got to be signalling to academia and the institutions about the jobs and the skills they need to do the job to be done in a new and modern way. And I think STEM is fantastic, and it is clear STEM is going to be very important in this next era. But I believe in STEAM. The A is important in there. That's the arts, that's the creativity, that's the beauty, that's the simplicity, and it's when those come together that I think great things happen for people.
Yeah, well, Mel, I'm keen for your thoughts on this as well, right? Because we actually saw just this week a Harvard Business Review article published that talked about the importance of emotion and context when it comes to decision making. What are the skills that you look for and will be looking for in the years ahead? What's your advice to those who are wondering how to make sure they have the skills for these jobs of the future?
Yeah, well, look, and I think the other panellists have mentioned this as well. I mean, just sort of discussing the previous point about what the role of government and industry is. I mean, I look at the workforce at Google, and we don't hire people because they have a specific skill set all the time. We hire people who are agile. We hire people who are leaders naturally, who want to step up and have just good general cognitive, ability. And when you invest in hiring someone like that, you want to invest in their skill development and you want to help them on their journey of lifelong learning. So, I've been at Google for 13 years. I mean, the roles at Google have changed considerably over the last 13 years. The disruption that Google has faced has been big. There is a role for industry to play. There is a role for government, however, to play in terms of setting the vision and creating, an aspiration for all Australians to want to be part of what this new economy is going to be looking like. We want girls, in particular, to be, leaning into learning science and technology, and only then will we have the ability to have technology that's truly inclusive, for example. We want the government to be working with that truck driver on the now problem, like, yes, tomorrow your job's not going to be here, but how do we encourage that truck driver to want to encourage their son and daughter to get involved in science and technology and evolve? I mean, look, again, this is not new stuff. I look at what my mum and dad did for a living, and my dad was a radio technician in the Air Force. Like, it's a job that does not exist today. I, again, couldn't have chosen my career path when I was 18. So it's how are we creating agile, constant learning in our economy and making sure that we're incentivising the right groups and the right sort of courses that are going to stimulate the economy.
Yeah, Lee, before we move on from this topic, do you want to add on anything on that from your perspective, and about the role that businesses like yours play in paving that path for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. And I obviously agree with a lot of what the panellists have said. And there's a societal safety blanket, I guess, if you want to call it, that the government needs to take ownership of, as Matt was alluding to, in those fabric changes in society. But there's two things to this that I see, which is, as a company, as a tech company in the world today, it's incumbent on us to ensure that the future workforce is ready to adapt to the technologies we want to bring to market, to the innovations we're trying to drive. And like Mel at Google and Pip at Salesforce, we're all investing in skills. Microsoft in particular, we match the investments we make in product research are matched by the investments we make in building skills programs for students and for STEM and for STEAM, as Pip says, for that sort of environment to grow into that world. And I have a 13-year-old son who's in year 8 making his elective choices now. And when we talk about what does his future look like, I talk a lot to him about that balance, the agility that he needs to think about, the lifelong learner. Don't just focus your energies on the things you enjoy, broaden your horizons, learn lean into things that are perhaps a challenge for you, but be a more rounded person. And I think, to the core here is that as individuals, we need to adapt and become more agile in our approach and our constant lifelong learning. And it's incumbent on industry to encourage that, but I think it's also incumbent on individuals to take ownership of their own life and governments to provide the mechanisms for us as citizens of a country to do that as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of good advice there for 13-year-olds everywhere. I want to come back to this privacy discussion, Rose, because you were talking about it earlier, and there are some really interesting figures in the research. So we know generally that nearly everyone says they care deeply about privacy. They're worried about their privacy online. But barely any are actually reading all the terms and conditions, as you point out. Now, you indicated not all privacy is equal, I think were your words. Tell us a bit more about that. What really matters and what doesn't matter?
Sure, yeah, they were my words. And stuff matters like health records,
Right.
like whether you've gone through some kind of medical issue or psychiatric issue.
That's a no-go area.
That's a no-go area. Stuff matters that is deeply private and personal, but the detergent brand you use or the kind of fast food you use, all of that stuff, that's fair game.
People are happy to give away
Happy to
that
give it
information.
away.
So health data, financial data?
Financial data, health data, anything that's considered private that you would never post on a social media channel, that's off limits. Anything that's to do with what you consume, how you're banking, how you're purchasing, pretty much fair game for most Australians, because the exchange for that information is that they'll get something for it. So they're happy with that. But they want to see a very big black line between one and the other. And
I don't know if anyone wants to comment on this as well, but Rose, the recent example of the government trying to get this COVID-safe app rolled out, and they did get to, on the latest numbers, was 40% of adult smartphone users, so they're happy enough with that. But I guess this did go to some personal privacy concern about where they were or who they were with and these sort of things. I mean, how do you think they did in broaching this issue?
Well, look, if you look at the number of people that could have downloaded it, it would have been something like 19 million smartphones and something like 6 million did, right? So that's a big chunk of Aussies that didn't for whatever reason. I think they did well enough. I think that we're not very good as a nation in talking about privacy and what it means and what the effects of good privacy or bad privacy are. I think the government did okay. But in the end, more Australians were concerned about where that information would be housed and what would happen to it post-COVID. Even though the government was very clear about the fact that it would do no harm, it was not going to be stored anywhere. It was just a tracing mechanism. Australians didn't believe it.
They did okay, says Rose. Matt, what do you think? What would you go with a similar judgment?
Yeah, I think there's one point that I want to pick up on in what Rose said about the distinction between significant pieces of information like health records and what seem like banal pieces of information like shopping data, and how willing people are to trade that off. But it's interesting to think about how willing people would be to do that and whether they think that's a valuable trade-off when they start to see what happens when those aggregate. We've seen examples of big data sets being built out of people's shopping information that say, well, okay, well, if you've tended to buy these things in the past, then I'll customise my recommendations to you so that you tend to buy those things that you're interested in the future. But we know that purchasing behaviour is correlated with class, and purchasing behaviour is correlated with health, which can mean that people who are in less well-off situations continue to get recommended unhealthy products because that's what they've been building in the past, which then affects the very health that they're trying to protect with those health records. So there is a really big and complex picture here, and I think that speaks to the COVID-19 and the COVID-Safe app as well. Some of this had to do with generalised distrust around government, as well as a not clear deliverable benefit to individuals, which meant that there was not a huge impetus for them to do it. But part of it was also about overselling what this app did. And I think that lost people. When the Prime Minister is talking about this app as being like sunscreen, which protects you from getting sunburnt, and saying that this app functions like sunscreen, what happened was it started to lead people to believe that so long as I have the app, I'm safe to go outside. I'm no longer vulnerable to contracting COVID-19, which is, of course...
So a false sense of security, essentially.
Yeah, of course, not what it was designed as. So the messaging around these pieces of technology and the way that we try to build people's consent in meaningful ways, which again speaks to the privacy point and the 4,000-page privacy kind of end-user licensing agreements. The way that we try to build meaningful consent instead of just seeing consent as a burden that needs to be overcome so that we get people using the tech that we want them to be using because we know it's good for them, that's the piece that I think the government tripped over on.
Yeah, look, well, I see everyone nodding on that point, but when it comes to the way the government sold this, I mean, does anyone have a suggestion as to what might have been a better approach here? To be transparent about what this thing can and can't do to help build that trust. Mel?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we have to be fair here. I mean, this is technology that was built, by the government in a very, very short amount of time. Yeah. But let's be fair. But I think to Rose's earlier point, I mean, some of the things that we're seeing is, privacy is not going to be a one-size-fits-all, and it's probably not going to be a one-off. So I think what we need to start challenging is the concept of what I signed up for yesterday is still what I agree to today, first and foremost. But what are the kind of regular and meaningful intervals where we can really recheck in with, users and consumers about what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do? So, for example, we've recently rolled out, as part of Android, I know iPhone do this now as well, but you used to sort of download an app and then kind of sign your life away. And now there's sort of more frequent reminders every time you open the app. Do you want to allow it to use this data when you're using it all the time? And it's this sort of element of transparency, choice and control that I think is really going to help Australians, use those dials like an equaliser to say, well, I want a bit more of that, a bit less of that. I'm okay for this app, but not for that app. And so it's incredibly personal, it's incredibly fluid. And so we need to move away from it's static and it's forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, Matt touched on the way algorithms can distort what people on lower incomes or lower health status are recommended to buy and so on. What are some of the other big ethical questions when we look at what's coming in artificial intelligence?
Well, the thing is here, for building AI, you need data sets, right? So if you bring a lot of different data sets together, you would have a very, very good view on every single person. And as we discussed, there is a certain limit and there's a privacy issue that people are not comfortable that we bring all these data together. So for me, AI is more like a technology, but then what we do with that and how we apply it, that is the main question. So to your point earlier, David, when you said, well, should we now all have techie skills? I don't want to live in a world just based on techies. And I think that the human race also should not just adapt to the needs of tech. It's the other way around, please. So the tech needs to adapt to the needs of the humans. That is how we need to think at it. And then the last thing is, I think there's a jungle out there. So there's so much evolving tech. It's going so fast that we need to help persons who are not daily in contact with tech to navigate this in a better way. So that means for CMOs, for CEOs, for media leaders, for business leaders, we should help them to navigate this and say, well, do you really want to do that? I understand that short term, maybe it's increasing your profit, but I guess your customers, users will turn away after a while. So, we have to find that balance and there is no silver bullet for it.
What I loved reading in this report was some of the insights into what's coming, what could be coming. And perhaps, Rose, let's start with the meaning in voice. Voice recognition is already with us.
Yeah.
But context, tone, the meaning in your actual voice, how is this going to be used in the future?
Well, this to me is the most thrilling, right? So our voices tell us who we are, cadence, intonation, speed. People know me, for example, when I speak very quickly, I'm urgent, I need something now. All of those things will be able to build into some level of algorithm where we will be served up information or brands or opportunities based on our voice.
So if you're speaking quickly, you're sounding urgent, then suddenly
or excited, it's 9 p.m, I have a glass of wine in my hands, it's Thursday night, the house is quiet, oh, Jimmy Choo shoes at $3,000 a pop, that's going to get served up to me, because my voice is suggesting a level of brand and a level of sophistication, potentially. Or I need another kind of opportunity or brand or something. But I think the voice is a window to the soul. And we are just at the very beginning of that frontier. Right now it's used for search, but where we can take that to me is thrilling, and thrilling for the kinds of clients that we have as well.
Matt, is it thrilling for you? Are there big ethical questions around the way this could be used?
Yeah, I think the first point is to say not everyone has a voice. And so when we think in that way and about the opportunities there, what are the opportunities that might be deprived to some groups, and how might we then think about different ways of delivering those services? The second point is to say that I think when we talk about ethics in technology, we tend to get fixated on kind of one large issue, And 5 years ago, still kind of today, we thought a lot about privacy. It's now moved on to conversations around fairness being the big conversation, fairness and inclusivity. The next wave in that, and the wave we need to be thinking about now, is freedom and autonomy and agency of users. When I find out that there's an opportunity for someone to effectively use kind of behavioural economics and a whole heap of clever nudges to find when I am most vulnerable to be sold to, and that's the moment when someone's going to sell to me, that's a red flag. You know, when I think about, you know, the kind of organisation that I want to trust, and I find out that that's the way that they're approaching my data, I have reason to hesitate. But the technology is exciting because to Rose's point earlier about how we might think about apps that can help to advise people who are in financial hardship against impulse purchases, that same insight around when someone is vulnerable to making a particular kind of purchase, that could, if we can manage the agency and not be too paternalistic about that, there are huge opportunities to actually elevate people and do more with this than just kind of like find the next sale. So I think some of this is about the examples and the opportunities that we decide to seize on with the technology, which again comes back to that question, it's as much about the message as it is about what gets built.
Well, Mel, I mean, where's this up to in terms of Google's perspective, just sticking with this, you know, meaning in voice recognition? I mean, are you going to listen to a vulnerable Matt in his voice and try and sell him something in that moment of vulnerability? Where is this at?
Well, so this is just a really good example of how complex this issue is, because Matt actually talked about, well, there are people who don't have a voice. I mean, voice technology has enabled people who don't have literacy skills to also access information that they've never been able to access before. So there is a constant balance. And I think what I do agree on, though, is that it's the application of the technology where we need to start looking and asking the hard questions and applying that layer of scrutiny. Because I think, you know, in a mental health situation, for example, if there is something that I can pick up on in someone's tone of voice that gives me a risk indicator, then I think that's a good use of that technology. For the marketers and advertisers in this room, I think it is a delicate balance that you need to really tread, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. So I mean, if you think it poses a lot of questions, it also poses a lot of opportunities. But yeah, I mean, I think personally I'm thrilled by the technology and how we can see it being applied, particularly, as I mentioned before, in those sort of next billion user markets where literacy is not like it is here in Australia. Yeah,
and the other one, Rose, that, and we were talking about this before, the program as well, is the gate biometric technology.
Yeah.
Tell me what that is.
So the new frontier is that your walk or your gait, and we all have one, can determine everything about you.
The way I stand.
The way you use your shoulders.
I slump.
For me, I'm a tall lady, 5'11". When I put my hands on my hips, arms akimbo, people know that I'm displeased. So that says something about me. That's my gait. People know the sound of my clippity-clop high heel shoes before I enter a room. But these are all indicators that can predictively talk about how we feel about all the big issues, where we vote, to whom we would give our vote.
Hang on, we can tell which way you vote by the way you're moving.
Apparently, this is the next frontier. This is what the DARPA, this is what the great minds of the military technology, I mean, this is military-grade technology, and you can see that they're probably applying it for the purposes of stopping terrorism. There's a very legitimate reason why they're doing it. But it's whether this stuff will ever make it into the world, and we're talking 15, 20 years away, but whether this stuff will get commercialised and come into Jens's and my world, this is a massive ethical question, right? This is the mother of all ethical questions.
I see Matt nodding his head.
Yeah, I can see Matt over there too.
Let's get an initial thought from you, Matt, on that idea.
So I mean, to the very obvious point again, to go back to the, and Mel's right. You know, every potential group that's left behind by a particular technology, there is another special group that can be served by that. But not everyone has a gait. Some people move with walkers, some people move through wheelchairs. So we need to think about that as well. But we also need to think about how these different data sets affect not just kind of typical groups who tend to get focused around accessibility concerns, but I think about, for example, my research when I was an academic was in the military and in military ethics. Now, people who have come from a military background will, by nature of their training, have a different gait to people. Athletes will have a different gait to people, which is not necessarily a predictor of mood. My son, who's 4 years old and is still kind of mastering walking, has a gait that might at some stages resemble a drunk person. There are so many variations to these kinds of things, and there's a scholar named Ellen Broad who's down at ANU who made this point really nicely the other day when when some tests of this kind of gait analysis technology arose, is again, like, we move so quickly to see a new technology and think, what are all the juicy things that we can do? And part of that is because we've got such a halo effect around the shininess of new technology. And what we really need to do is just slow down and go, can it really do what it says it's going to do? Can we really tell how someone's going to vote based on the way they walk?
Well, this comes back to the earlier discussion, though. Pip, your thoughts on this? Does slowing down and doing what Matt's suggesting there allow competitors to get the jump? How do you, whether it's this voice recognition, the meaning in voice, or this gait biometric technology? I mean, how should businesses approach this sort of stuff?
Well, I think the thematic through this has been the same. The technology itself is inherently neither good nor bad. It doesn't have a personality. It is your application of it. So all of these things have potential, and I think Matt's point is, yes, it can bring some people forward and it may unintentionally bring things back, other people back or not include. So that's why humans are important in this whole equation. It is up to us to ask the question, are we doing this universally? We have to meet people where they are. Yes, not everybody has a voice, so what's the job to be done? Some people might be able to use natural language processing, other people can't, so how do I help them do the same job in a different way? So we have to be inclusive in that design, or we will unintentionally leave people behind. I am actually, though, just to comment, I do think this gait thing is real, because I have a 16-year-old and I can tell when she's coming up those stairs if she's angry or sad. I just never thought to commercialise it. I am kicking myself right now.
Yes, this does come back to, I mean, the recent example of facial recognition and, some of the problems that have emerged with that, and also with algorithms being used in recruitment programs as well that can throw up discrimination on gender or race and so on.
Yeah. So maybe one example, when we developed the voice recognition for BMW, for the man-machine interaction, then all kinds of people came up, oh, is it a male or is it a female? Wait a second, is that the real question we need to answer here? So we need to come back and think about what purpose we are driving. And I think in the next years, after all that digital transformation discussion, we will see, especially in branding and in marketing, a purpose discussion. So what are we using this for? But before we come there, I think a lot of companies and a lot of senior leaders also need to get more curious, more open to these new technologies and understanding that better. Navigating in that field, also getting help and understanding, okay, this is the real purpose. This is what I want to do. I want my users, customers, shoppers be more happy, more fast, more convenient. And these driving principles are sometimes left behind because you are like short-term looking for an answer, maybe the COVID app. And then you build something. It's built by techies, but it's not built on a deeper purpose.
Perhaps just to sum up, these issues and how businesses, those watching, can best grapple with these issues. And Jens, to you first on this, what are some of the two or three things they really should be doing, thinking about right now?
Well, do you have a data strategy? Do you really understand what your company knows and where the data is sitting? And what is then, third question, what is good for your users and what is convenient for them? And lastly, what I also think, if you look at our board of directors, they are certainly a bit aged. And sometimes it's good to have a tech person in there as well. Just
on the board.
On the board, just another voice, not the only voice, please, but another voice to say, oh, these are opportunities that we can actually grab and understand now, so let's at least check them out. And I think there's a huge room for improvement. If you see what is growing in our economy and what is bringing wealth, then it's for sure the tech and the digital business, most and forefront leading this. And therefore, we need to cope with that and we need to better understand it and being open for this. So
And let me just get some other thoughts from our industry leaders. Lee, what would be your bits of advice in a nutshell for businesses about how to balance these questions of technology and humanity?
Yeah, thanks, David. Look, I think fundamentally there's an ownership and a leadership that needs to appear in all and many organisations around this need for this. It needs to come from the top, and we've seen that very viscerally here in Microsoft in our change of leadership, has driven this culture of kind of awareness of these challenges and questions. The other thing I would probably highlight, and we've talked a bit about this in the last sort of question there, was around this issue of diversity in decision. So we talk a lot about humans need to be in the loop. Humans need to be part of that decision. But to Matt's point earlier, humans is a broad term. What we actually really need to think about is who are the people we are including in that decision? Because in the technology world, it boils down to a technician who's building a piece of code, and he or she is being forced and left to make some decisions. And as organisations, I think we need to ensure that there's a process that doesn't leave any one individual, but makes decisions by a sort of a collective group of those that need to be involved in that discussion. And finally, it's about the balance. That core message we talked about earlier on. The whole purpose of this conversation, tech and humanity need to be played out in balance. They're not fighting. They're not sort of to be set against each other, but they are to work in balance and cohesion going forward.
I want to get to a few questions we've got from the audience, and this one, it does touch on something we were talking about earlier, but let's get directly to an answer here. If any of you were going to university next year, what would you study, Rose?
This is going to be really unpopular, but I would study an arts degree, and I'll tell you why. Deductive reasoning, critical thinking, imagination. I can teach people at WPP any skill. What I can't give them is kindness, decency, a backbone and integrity. I think that is what this country needs, and I'd be studying an arts degree, so hoo-ha to the government. There we go.
You'd have to be paying $14,000 a year, I'm telling you right now.
I would.
Mel, do you want to offer us a view as to what you would study if you were going to uni next year?
Well, look, I would still probably do my economics degree. I think I've learned a lot from it. But look, I think I would be involved more in tech and maybe user-centred design, because I think, you don't necessarily have to have all of the tech skills to run a tech organisation or to code, but having that partnership between someone who really understands how to get into a user's mind and understand and solve their problem, I think that would be something I'd be studying.
Matt, any tips or your own view of what you'd do next year at uni?
I think whatever you do next year at uni, the reason that I was concerned about the government's announcement is not necessarily because it's going to affect demand, there's been some discussion around that, but because it might affect the kinds of electives people take, regardless of what they're studying. And if you're studying science and tech, if you're studying economics, if you're studying whatever you're studying, pick some stuff that's outside of your wheelhouse. Take some philosophy, for goodness sake. There's so much of what we're dealing with where it's not just about what we build, but the underlying assumptions about the way the world is, the way it should be, and how it could be different, that need to be really deeply interrogated so that we're not deeply embedding it and locking it in place. Take something that gets you out of your default way of thinking so that you can hear what a different discipline has to say and how they think about those problems, because that's the kind of stuff that's going to build better tech. When we can hear not just from different disciplines, from different genders, from people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, all of those different things coming together. So whatever you take something different as well.
I think that was Lee's advice to his 13-year-old earlier as well. So there you go.
Good advice.
All right, another question here from the audience. Are tech companies more important than government in enacting change? Pip, what do you think? Who is more important?
Well, I think that the reality is tech is moving faster than regulation and the law is. That's just the pace of change we're all living with. So there is an inherent responsibility for technology companies to be saying, is this okay? Should I be doing this? Is this ethical? Because what we're saying is regulation coming behind. Even like Jen's talked earlier about autonomous vehicles. The reason autonomous vehicles is not fully in use is not because the car can't do more, it's because the regulation doesn't allow the car to use all its technology that's available today. So I think that it is incumbent on us to take a leadership position around it.
Yeah, Lee, what do you think? Who's setting the pace here?
Oh, look, I 100% agree with Pip, obviously, that technology outpaces law and regulation, as it should do. We don't want laws just created with gay abandon. That will be a ridiculous situation to be in. But I think there's a little danger in the way the question's phrased around importance, because I don't see either one as being more important, but if they're not working together at the same in the same mindset, then we do have a challenge. So it's about cohesion, not importance.
Yeah, and Mel, I mean, I've got to ask
Absolutely.
you've got your ongoing issues with the government on a few fronts, but can you work together in a sense to what Lee's saying there?
I think it absolutely has to be about partnership. We talked about it before with the skills context, right? If we don't have government solving a now problem and an industry coming in to solve a future problem and thinking about how we're going to evolve over the long term, then, I don't think it's a binary thing.
Another question here, what role does the panel see in government and governance of technology? How can non-tech industry savvy elected leaders govern a sector that they don't understand? And yes, there are a few of them there who don't necessarily understand the industry. But this is a problem not just unique to Australia. Is this something we see with politicians worldwide?
Exactly, it's not unique. The point that I want to make is, for sure, we don't want that government and industry is the same, because then you run a power purpose with an industry purpose together, and then things can get really dangerous. So I think it's good that we have different corners and different forces in our society. Not only the media that you represent as a journalist, but also then the industry, the lawmakers, the government. If this comes all together, I'm very worried.
Yeah, well, Matt, what's your perspective on that? Is it a good point there that it is good to have a bit of tension?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bigger question in this country around what kind of politician we deserve and we need versus what kind of politician we have.
I don't know if we'll answer that one today.
No, and I don't plan to. But I think that there is a different role. I don't think that that the role of a politician has to be able to talk about the industry at the same level of depth as an industry leader would be. But also we tend, I think, and you would know this very well, David, that we tend to overstate the role of the visible politician or minister at the expense of the public service and the groups that are around in the department to facilitate that. And I think there are so many touch points that don't go from organisation CEO to government minister that are allowing those conversations to take place and allowing that interaction to take place. I'm not the best placed person to comment on the strength of those things right now, but I think that it's at those lower levels and it's within the public service that a lot of that interaction is going to take place rather than with elected officials.
Yeah, well, Mel, again, your perspective on this is an important one. I mean, government's often looking to your company and others when it comes to tax and interaction with the media and so on. I mean, do you think government gets the industry?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, Matt sort of put it really well. I mean, as a leader of an organisation or as the minister leading a department, it's not necessarily a job to be a subject matter expert. It is your job to make sure that you've got open lines of communication and you've got very clear pipes in and pipes out, but that you have a capable organisation underneath you who can be that subject matter expert and help inform and make better decisions. So for me, consultation is one of the biggest things, and that, I think 90% of the time when we work together, we can come up with solutions that are best for everybody.
Another question here from the audience. We have some of the biggest names in the IT industry with us today. How open are they all to always do the right thing? It's a lot of responsibility. How do they manage it? Well, I guess, this is a somewhat personal question about how you do approach these ethical issues we're talking about, how you each manage to balance this. Pip, do you want to kick off with some views on that?
Yeah, look, I think, and I know obviously Lee and Mel quite well. I know that the intention of, those human beings is really good. So we get out of bed every day trying to make sure we're helping our customers, helping, improve educational outcomes at school or health outcomes in the healthcare sector. That's why we do what we do. Technology is underpinning every single industry. Nobody is perfect. I mean, you think right now what we're experiencing on the back of COVID, we don't have the experience to actually know what to do or what steps to take. So yes, we may make some missteps. We may try something that doesn't work. And so what I think is important around that is not just good intention, but controls in place to find out when things go wrong quickly. Cultures that enable people to speak up and say, this is not okay. Governance and reviews to make sure you can see what is happening. You can't just have good intention. You've got to have actually systems in place. And so I think that is the role that we have to take right now.
Yeah, Mel, I mean, does it weigh on you, those getting the right balance?
Look, I mean, if you'd asked me that question, I probably would have said exactly what Pip said, but I really want to double down on this culture piece, because I think any sort of culture where you don't feel like you can speak up is that's where these missteps are going to happen, right? So I need a whole group of people around who are going to hold me to account, and when I see something that I don't think's right, I can say, whoa, hang on, like what's going on here? That is way more important. The culture is way, way more important than sometimes the tech that you're working on.
Yeah, Jens, do you want to offer a view on that?
And as leaders, we have to also allow a certain degree of mistakes. So you cannot say, be perfect, and you don't take any risk, and you don't do any new thing in your life.
And when there is a mistake, I mean, how do you deal with that?
When I worked at Google, I don't know, Mel, if you still have it, but I loved the Penguin Award.
Yeah.
So that's something where you get awarded by being, courageous and being out there and doing a mistake, and then letting everybody know, hey, I had this in this data set, I did this assumption, and I was wrong, and I don't want that all you others are doing the same mistakes. So I talk openly about it, and I actually get rewarded for it. So, we have to find a more open culture, and then it comes also to diversity. Because to run a company now just from a CEO point of view, or from a marketing point of view, or from a tech point of view, or product point of view is wrong. So you need all these different aspects and all the different point of views that you make the right decision. And this is why I said we need in the higher hierarchies a few more techies, and then maybe also a few more people like Matt who are reminding us, hey, this is what good is all about, and that is what human is all about. And this is what the report is all about, actually.
Indeed. We've got another question here from the audience. What practical advice do you have for teams or brands who are just getting started and exploring AI? And Matt, well, perhaps we'll get your thoughts first on that from your perspective. What should be the first things to consider?
Why do you need AI? What are you using it for? I think becomes the first question. There's a lot of times where it's like, well, the newest technology, the shiniest technology, that's the one that we're going to grab. That's the one that we're going to go for. So that would be my one piece of advice: is to start with the why, and that feedback comes through in the report that WPP AUNZ have produced as well. Is to start with that first question of why. And the second thing is, and I guess this speaks to the previous question a little bit as well, is that we can all agree that most people get out of bed with good intentions and want to make a positive contribution to the world. I think that the part that gets complicated when we're dealing with technology, with AI, with things like that, is that your good intentions aren't enough. That actually so much of the work that we do with organisations and people is about, organisations that have a great goal in mind, they have a beautiful picture of the world that they want, but there are so many capabilities that are required to actually see that through under complexity, that a lot of this has to do with competence as well. And so being really honest and humble about what are the kinds of questions that we aren't equipped to answer, what's too big a challenge for us right now, and actually trying to not be the super ambitious organisation so you've got the best value proposition when you first kind of are seeking funding and support, but actually showing that kind of ethical restraint that I started this conversation talking about right at the outset, and just growing gradually as you feel like your competence is growing as well.
Yeah, Lee, well, just your thoughts on that same question about practical advice, teams just getting started exploring with AI.
Yeah, thanks, David. There's a couple of things I think I'd probably draw on, which is, as we've touched on it, there's a cultural need in the business to be ready and adapted to this idea of AI, which is, the sort of fail fast mentality, the experimentation mentality, the value in risk as an organisation. So I think you need to have that culture ingrained in the organisation and think about that. But then on the other side of it, as Jens pointed out a little while ago, AI and data go hand in hand, and so we tend to think of this as a three-legged stool. You need to invest in data governance and data thinking, data sheets for data sets kind of mindsets. You need to invest in the AI technology and the skills and understanding it and recognising the ethical concerns. And then the humanistic side of it, the ethics and society element of it. Have a voice that is different to your normal viewpoint to kind of cast those questions into the mix. That's probably where I'd start.
We've got another question here. Should corporates be required to invest a percentage of profits into retraining their people to protect them from future irrelevance? Rose, this gets back to the discussion earlier about the future of work. Should there be some requirement to put a certain amount of money into retraining the workforce?
I would love that world. I would welcome it with open arms. I think it's weird that we kind of stop learning after we do that first university degree. Lifelong learning should be a thing. And if we are not teaching our people over and over again how to adapt, we don't have an economy that's fit for anything. We still have an agrarian education system for a technology world, if you ask me. I think we need more change in education than for anything else in this country, and I think corporates should chip in.
Yep, do you agree, Jens?
Yes. So I think everything changed. You know, we now talk about self-driving cars, we talk about voice recognition, we talk about AI, all of these things. But, you know, looking at schools, they still have their white thing, I don't know, the chalk that they're writing on the blackboard.
Right.
And the books are like, I don't know how many years old. So, and we know how kids are learning. They're not learning a language by, oh, this is the regulars for the grammar, and this is what you need to know by heart. They learn totally different. And I have now 3 kids here adapting to a new language, to a new culture, and I see how they learn and how fast they're learning without books in a totally different environment. And therefore, I could not agree more, and we should never stop. So we don't need to say, well, this amount of profit. It should be inherent with every leader that he's investing in the capabilities of the people in the organization. If he doesn't, he will be out of business very soon. Yeah.
We'll take one last question, and again, this does touch on something we were talking about earlier. What is the role of creativity in our future? How does that fit in with tech? And Mel, you did touch on this earlier. What is the role of creativity into the future?
Well, look, I'm a massive music fan, and I think about the impact of technology on the music scene, not only just from a electronic music point of view, but just making sounds better and being able to carry thousands of songs and stream them live over the internet all day. So creativity, is never going to go. And it just speaks to this issue of it's not binary. It's not human or the machine. It's and. And so I think when we start framing that way, we might think about things differently.
Well, let's get a thought from everyone on this as the last question. Lee, what the role of creativity when it comes to tech?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Mel just said. I mean, and I played piano for 30 years now, and for me, that is a creative escape from what I do in my normal job. But there's a blending between the two. It's a different mindset, and it shifts your brain into a different gear. I think our world without creativity is not a world I want to be in.
Pip, I'm not sure if you played piano for 30 years, but what's the...
Look, I don't even sing very well. This is not my strength. But that speaks to what I would say is actually, for me, creativity is about diversity. We need to mirror the planet we serve. And what's creativity for Mel or Lee or Matt might be different to me. So it is about creating an environment where that diversity can flourish and we can all enjoy what beauty and creativity and music and poetry and coding looks like. And so how are we making sure that everybody can flourish in a creative world?
Yeah, Matt, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Pip's nailed it, talking about a creative world and a diverse world. I think that we often think about creativity in terms of individual genius and spontaneity and the kind of hobbies that we bring. But creativity has an environment in which it's able to flourish. And I think that an environment that reflects the diversity of the world. And in Australia, we get caught up about thinking a lot about gender diversity, but we don't do necessarily enough work to think about the role of Indigenous Australians and the role of people of colour and the picture that they play in questions about diversity. The other great thing about creativity is it's so natural for the tech industry, and it's exactly what we need to do when we're doing ethics as well. We're thinking about the different possible worlds that our choices will create and making a value judgment on those possible worlds. Which one deserves to exist? Which ones don't? What might be the things that we didn't anticipate happening? Those kind of crystal ball problems that we talk about in ethics, they are really a function of creativity. So again, to that point around the relationship between ethics and innovation, they're two sides of the same story, and the people best placed to solve those ethical issues are precisely the creative people that are being hired and the environments that are being fostered within tech organisations and hopefully other organisations as well.
And Jens, you've worked in and with a lot of companies in tech. What are the ones that you can see where creativity's made the difference?
Well, we are now running a lot of creative agencies, so maybe I need to hire Matt into one of those, because exactly these questions are relevant for our jobs every day. What is inspiring for the user? What is convenient for the user? What is great about that brand? And these questions we need to answer every day in a different and very dynamic environment. And therefore, I love where I'm at right now. So it's not only about the tech, it's about the combination of creativity and tech.
And Rose, final word to you, as someone who has a creative background as well.
Sure. Well, look, creativity is innovation. I think that it's funny that we don't think of the technology businesses as being started by two people who had an idea. And that idea came out of the sky, and that has fueled an industry. I think that we need to think about how the ideas economy is the future for this country, and creativity and imagination cannot be replaced by anything. I love the idea that out of nothing can come an idea, and from that idea you can get an entire industry up. So I think it's everything.
Well, it certainly is, and on that point I think it's a great note to finish on. I'd like to thank all of you. If we were at a real conference we'd get a big round of applause at this point, I should note, but Rose Herceg, Jens Monsees, Mel Silva, Pip Marlow, Lee Hickin and Matt Beard. Terrific discussion with all of you. Thank you so much for that. Look, thank you, and you can of course get in touch with WPP AUNZ for further information. The report is going to be shared with everybody who's taken part today, for all the attendees. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for your company, for the discussion. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.